Hello Cloud Crews and welcome to this lesson within which I'm going to give a really basic introduction into Json or the JavaScript object notation format. Now this format is used within many products and services offered by AWS and used within the wider IT landscape as a reliable and efficient data interchange format. This lesson is not going to be an in-depth look at JSON, more it's just going to give just enough information to allow you to understand the JSON specific elements of this course. So in this lesson we'll learn the basics of JSON, and some students may have covered some of these elements if they've done other studies for AWS such as the associate level courses, or they have wider IT experience. So what is JSON? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's a way to represent structured data for interchange between applications. It's often used within web services, specifically those that use REST APIs, because of its simple, lightweight nature. But it's one of many different formats that can fulfill the same task. More importantly, it's a common format for data input and output between AWS commands. Now, JSON is constructed of name-value pairs, and an example of this may be color and red. Now, the value can be a string, a number, a boolean, an array, or another JSON structure. So let's review the basic structure of JSON. Now, we've mentioned that a basic building block of JSON is a value. A value can be a number, a string, which is generally denoted by quotes, a boolean, which is a true or false value, and it can be an array, which is a list of objects, or an object. Now, an object is more commonly known as a JSON schema, or aligns with the dictionary object in Python, which we've discussed previously. Lastly, a value can be a null value, and that's important to remember. So a key value pair, also known as a name value pair in JSON, consists of a key, i.e. name, followed by a colon, and then a value, i.e. Adrian. A JSON object, also known as a JSON schema, is a collection of key value pairs separated by commas and generally surrounded by curly braces. In this example, we have name, Adrian, and then a comma, and then another key value pair of sex, male, and then a comma, and then another key value pair of age, 36. And this entire object is surrounded by curly braces and is a good representation of a person, in this case, me. Now, an array is an ordered list of values surrounded by square brackets. And typically, arrays form the values of key value pairs, i.e. in this case, sexes is the name, and then the value is male, female, or unknown. A JSON string contains either an array of values, defined above, or an object, which we've also looked at. A JSON document is another name for a JSON string or a schema, and complicated information can be conveyed via nested objects. Objects can contain objects and arrays can contain other arrays and or other objects, i.e. nested schemas. Now I know Cloud Gurus, this sounds really complicated. JSON is actually one of the most difficult things that I found to comprehend when I was doing my initial studies into AWS. If you've not touched JSON before, it's really difficult to get your head around, but the next couple of slides, I want to try and introduce it nice and gently, so that by the end of this lesson, you should have a basic idea of how to read JSON. So below are two JSON objects. The first is constructed of two key value pairs, and the second an object with one key value pair where the value is an array. So let's start with the left example. This is a single JSON object or single JSON schema. It consists of two key value pairs or name value pairs. The first is manufacturer, and the value of that is Apple. And the second is size, and the value of that is 13. Now, the example on the right is another single non-nested JSON schema, and it contains one key value pair. The name is sizes, and the value is a list or an array with 3 elements, 11, 13, and 15. Now with JSON, we can combine these structures into a single JSON object or a single JSON schema. And this is how this would look. So we have a single JSON schema or structure denoted by the single set of curly braces. And within this, we have 3 name value pairs. We have manufacturer : Apple, and the next is type : laptop, and the third is sizes, and then an array of 11 and 13. Now these are pretty academic examples. Let's have a look at how JSON and JSON style structures can be used in practice. So on the right is a JSON document which represents the creation of an S3 bucket. Now this is a piece of CloudFormation JSON, and if you haven't touched CloudFormation before, you'll be exposed to it within this course, and I do suggest that you look at the Cloud Guru course which talks about the basics of CloudFormation, and I'll put the URL to that course on screen for you now. So this document is a single object, and that's denoted by the outer curly braces or curly brackets. Within this object are 2 key value pairs. The first is type, and its value is AWS S3 bucket. And in CloudFormation, that denotes the type of object you're trying to create. And the second key value pair is properties. Now the value of properties is another JSON object or JSON schema. So this wider JSON object or JSON schema has a nested JSON schema, and the nested JSON schema is properties. And within properties, we're defining a single key value pair, and we're calling it bucket name as the name and test bucket as the value. So to reiterate, the value of properties is itself a JSON object or a JSON schema with one key value pair specifying the bucket name. And this is a pretty common example used throughout AWS. You need to get quite comfortable with the idea of nested JSON schemas. Complex CloudFormation templates, for example, may have many layers of nested schemas. And you can also have an array of JSON objects, and those JSON objects are obviously JSON schemas. So for example, a properties of something could be an array, and in that array, you could have multiple JSON schemas. So the reason I'm stressing the use of JSON and why I've mentioned CloudFormation is that we'll be using CloudFormation and JSON throughout this course. CloudFormation will be used to automate some of the more complex examples and demos within the course, and I'll try where possible to step through the JSON that's used so that you can understand it. JSON in general, however, is used extensively throughout AWS. A lot of the commands use JSON for both the inputs and the outputs, and quite often the structure of data that you're putting into and getting out of DynamoDB is expressed in JSON. So it's pretty important that you understand how JSON works from a high-level structural perspective. So in this shopping cart example, the JSON string contains an object, and this object is an order. So we'll see that we've got a curly brace there and a curly brace there, and that represents this wider order. And this order has a number of key value pairs. It has order ID and then a value, shopper name and a value, shopper email and a value. But then we also have the order contents name value pair. And this has order contents as the name, but as we can see by the square brackets here and here, it contains an array as its value. Now this array, inside it, has a number of JSON objects or schemas. The first one starts here and finishes here, and it's basically product ID 1, product name MacBook, quantity 1, and then the second JSON schema is product ID 2, quantity 15, and then we've got the close curly brace. So we can see a simple example of a JSON structure that has traditional name value pairs and also nested structures. In this case, it's a complex one. It's an array of JSON schemas. So just pause for a moment and look at this example and make sure that you understand that we've got traditional simple name value pairs. Then we've got name value pairs that we've seen before where the value is just a basic JSON structure denoted by curly braces or curly brackets. But then we can also have complex ones where we've got a name such as order contents and the value is an array, and that array could contain simple values such as 1, 2, 3, 4, but equally it can contain elements where the elements themselves are JSON schemas or objects. So just become comfortable with this level of complexity for JSON, as it will be used elsewhere and you'll need to understand it throughout this course. So in this example, we have a full JSON structure representing a person record. We start with simple name value pairs, first name John, last name Smith. Then we have a Boolean type, is alive, true. We have a number type, age equals 25. And then we move on to a complex type where the name is address and the value is a nested JSON object or nested JSON schema. And we've got street address, city, state, and postcode. And then next we have a phone numbers key value pair. And this is an example of a more complex one, where we have phone numbers as the name, and then we have an array or a list as the value. And in that list, we have a number of JSON nested schemas or nested JSON objects. For example, type equals home and then the phone number, and then type equals office and then the phone number. And lastly, we have examples of empty lists or null values for name value pairs, and that's perfectly valid. So we have children, which is an empty list because obviously this person has no children, and we have spouse equals null because this person doesn't have a spouse. Now I know that I'm labouring on with the examples, Cloud Gurus, but I hope by now that you're starting to understand the syntax and structure of JSON. So let's summarise. In this section, you've learned JSON and its basic syntax, the basic building blocks and types of JSON, so objects, values, arrays. I've introduced terms like schemas, name value pairs, key value pairs, just to try and remove some of the confusion. I've showed you how to construct basic JSON, and I suggest you go ahead and just play around, do a couple of examples, get comfortable with making basic valid JSON structure. And there are online examples of validity parsers for JSON structures, so you can try with a couple of those, and I'll put a link to one that I recommend on screen now, just so you can have a look. And I've also tried to show you how to read basic JSON, and that's very important for the remainder of this course. As I mentioned a couple of slides ago, JSON is used for input and output to many AWS commands, and especially DynamoDB interaction, as JSON is how it represents the structure of data being read from and written to DynamoDB. So it's very, very important that you can at least understand and follow the structure of JSON. And I've also exposed you to CloudFormation JSON, and CloudFormation JSON is important because it's how we're going to do a lot of the automation in this course. So for example, when we do create the lab machine instance, which will become clear shortly, we'll be using CloudFormation JSON to do that. When we're using some of the examples which need an S3 bucket, we'll be using CloudFormation to create those. When we're creating Lambda functions later on in the course, again, CloudFormation will be used to make those. So it's very important that you as a student understand how JSON is put together specifically for CloudFormation and very importantly for DynamoDB. Well, that's the end of this basic JSON introduction. Thanks for listening, Cloud Gurus. If you do have any questions, please let me know directly or via the Cloud Guru forums. Otherwise, feel free to move on to the next lesson.